Welcome to Still Unbelievable, a podcast by Reason Press, where we examine religious claims, especially those made by Christians, and we regularly respond to items that are featured on the podcast Unbelievable. We embrace dialogue, but as sceptical former believers, we will also criticise unfounded claims and unsupported beliefs. This is Matthew, and in this episode of Still Unbelievable, we examine and respond to points raised by Christians on the topic of abortion, specifically those who are anti-abortion. On October the 9th, 2021, the Unbelievable podcast featured a conversation on abortion between two Christians, Stephanie Gray Connors and the Reverend Bromley McLennan. We'll be playing out some of the comments from that episode and responding directly to them. Link 1 in the show notes will take you to that episode. Before we get to that, I would like to lay out my position on abortion as clearly and succinctly as I can. I oppose any and all measures to limit a woman's access to abortion, but I am not pro-abortion. I do not celebrate abortion. Abortion means that something has gone wrong. A woman considering abortion faces a terrible choice. I will not judge her for the choice she makes. I will actively support her no matter what choice she makes, but it is her choice to make. She is the one who faces the consequences of her choice no matter what it is. A woman who chooses abortion chooses it because other options are even less attractive to her, and we as a society help no one when we fail to recognise that fact. There is, however, one area where I will agree with those who are anti-abortion. That is, a world in which there are zero abortions is something we should desire. That would genuinely be an achievement that I would celebrate. The important question is, how do we get there? The answer is not by removing abortion as an option. The answer is by creating a world where abortion is never needed as an option. How we get there is a very real challenge, but that shouldn't stop us from trying. Safe and compassionate abortion must go hand in hand with good quality sex education that is appropriate for its audience. That is how you reduce abortion, and the evidence is to be seen in countries that treat their women better. The real tragedy in discussions about abortion is the failure of many to recognise and treat women with appropriate respect and dignity. Furthering a woman's trauma and despair through mandated full-term pregnancy does not solve anything. With that said, here is the intro to the Unbelievable episode on abortion. We'll be playing and commenting on key moments from the show, but to hear the full episode you will need to follow the link in the notes. Also in the show notes are the timestamps of the clips used, as well as other links which will be identified in the response comments. The first clip is part of the intro from host Justin Briley, where he makes reference to the Texas heartbeat bill that has recently been in the news.
Today, we're looking at abortion law and the Texas heartbeat bill. There was widespread coverage recently of the so-called Texas heartbeat bill prohibiting abortion after 6 weeks gestation. Pro-life groups welcomed the change. Critics have said it's unfair and dangerous for women. And to discuss the religious, ethical and legal questions around abortion law in the USA, I'm joined by Stephanie Gray Connors and Bromley McLennan. Stephanie is the founder of the pro-life charity Love Unleashes Life and the author of Love Unleashes Life, Abortion and the Art of Communicating Truth. She's a regular speaker in both Christian and secular settings on the subject of abortion. Reverend Bromley McLennan is a church minister in the USA and the author of Good Christian Sex, Why Chastity is Not the Only Option. And when Alabama proposed restricting abortion, she wrote an article for the Washington Post titled, I'm a pro-choice minister and I'm far from the only one. We should speak up more. So those are the two positions, broadly speaking, of the guests, but obviously they'll be nuancing where they stand on these particular issues as we get into the programme today. So Stephanie and Bromley, welcome along to the show.
At 4.5 minutes in, Justin asks Stephanie about her motivations. This is where we find out about her Catholic background. This isn't particularly surprising because Catholics do tend to be anti-abortion and active in the pro-life movement.
When it comes to the particular reason you decided to get into this, I mean, you are a Christian, I think you're a Catholic, and Was it that the kind of the impetus? And to what extent do you use, if you like, religiously motivated reasoning in the actual discussions and debates that you take part in?
Certainly my Catholic Christian background has provided a foundation for how I view human life. And at the same time, I would say I believe there are good non-sectarian reasons coming from a human rights perspective that someone could embrace to draw them to the conclusion that abortion should be rejected. So my religious worldview influences my perspective, but I have encountered people and often educate from a non-religious perspective, and those people in that argumentation can draw on a human rights argument that embraces equality for all humans, particularly the youngest of our kind.
The concerning thing about what we've just heard from Stephanie is the linking of human rights to the denial of abortion. Look up human rights organisations and you will find abortion is listed as part of the provision of essential health care. The show notes have links to IPAS, Amnesty International and the Centre for Reproductive Rights. Stephanie talks as though the opinions that she has are settled facts. They are not. At around about the 14.5-minute mark, Justin asks Stephanie to outline what the Texas Heartbeat Bill says.
Stephanie, perhaps you could outline for those who aren't particularly familiar with it what this Texas Heartbeat Bill is and why it's caused so much controversy. Would you do that for us?
Sure. The Texas Heartbeat Bill is really significant from a pro-life perspective because it goes very far in protecting preborn children almost from the entirety of their existence. It basically says that abortion cannot happen after a heartbeat has been detected. So people are talking about the 6-week line. The bill does not say abortion is not allowed after 6 weeks. It says abortion is not allowed after a heartbeat has been detected. It just so happens that with technology, a heartbeat can typically be detected around 6 weeks of pregnancy. The heart actually begins to beat at 21 days after fertilization, which would be 3 weeks, but because pregnancy is typically calculated from the last menstrual period, 2 weeks before fertilization occurred, the 3 weeks plus 2 more weeks is going to be about 5 weeks, and so it's 5 to 6 weeks that a heartbeat can be detected. And so the general standard that people have is, look, if there's a living being with a heart, it would be wrong to bring that heart to a stop, and so therefore making the argument that abortion should not be allowed. But what's significant about it is it empowers the average person, not the government, to be able to respond to where the individual becomes aware that someone has been involved in breaking this law, so that regular citizen could create a civil lawsuit against a abortion doctor or someone who aids and abets an abortion being committed, and therefore that could cost the individual, $10,000 or more. And so it is the fear amongst abortion supporters of being charged, thousands of dollars and having to go to court and being sued that is causing them to therefore not want to do abortions beyond the detectable heartbeat, which therefore means preborn children will be saved from abortions that would otherwise have occurred had this law not been in existence.
There are two major issues with what Stephanie has just said. The first is the issue over a heartbeat. A heart cannot beat until it is formed and connected to a blood supply system. What is being described at 6 weeks is not actually a heartbeat. See show notes for links explaining this further. We're going to hear more clips of Stephanie invoking science when it comes to the start of life, and here she invokes science with regards to heartbeat. This is a basic problem with religiously motivated arguments like this. The proponents take an absolutist view and will claim that science supports them, but it doesn't. This isn't the worst part of this segment though. The worst part is the fear it invokes. Stephanie seemed almost gleeful that ordinary people are encouraged by this bill to report providers of abortions, and that the consequences of this is a generated atmosphere of fear amongst those providers. 10 years ago there was a tragic death in Ireland because of this type of fear. A woman by the name of Savita Halappanavar died because the doctors caring for her were fearful of providing a requested abortion of a baby that was already going to die. As a result, the mother died of preventable complications. Abortion would have prevented the death of this mother, but instead religiously inspired fear robbed a family. This is just one example of why laws that encourage and promote fear are a bad thing. This bill might offer protection to the unborn, but that protection is at the expense of civilized behaviour and removes protection and freedom from the born. Do not be fooled into thinking that this bill gets us closer to a better society. It is a restrictive bill which generates a society which is less free and with more fear. Rather than protecting the living vulnerable, it seeks to control them, to beat them into compliance. Hearing Stephanie express delight about this should invoke images of Stasi informers and the red-cloaked world of Gilead. You do not want to live in that world, yet here we have a Christian wanting to create it. In this next section, Justin asks Stephanie directly if she is in favour of this law.
Can I assume you are generally in favour of this kind of more restrictive sort of legislation on abortion, Stephanie?
Absolutely. I'm very much in favor of the law. Now, of course, because science teaches us that life begins at fertilization, I think in an ideal world, abortion should be banned from the moment a human being comes into existence, which is sperm-egg fusion, which is the moment of fertilization, which is 3 weeks before the heart begins to beat. However, because abortions happen beyond the heartbeat being detected, that a law like this, rather than introducing an evil, is decreasing the evil. It's making a bad situation better, and therefore it has my wholehearted support.
Here we have more of Stephanie's absolutist language. There is no room for nuance in her words here. Abortion is an evil and you must ban it to remove that evil. No acknowledgement that forcing a woman to endure an unwanted pregnancy is itself an evil. No mention whatsoever of the trauma that causes. No recognition at all of the harm that this would cause.
If you look at biology, it is the start of the heart, but as with all of our bodily functions, they don't occur right away. There's a timing to it. There's a progression. There's a development. So there's no denying that the heart needs to develop more, but nonetheless, there is a heartbeat.
Here, Stephanie has responded to pushback that it's not really a heartbeat. Stephanie does acknowledge that here, and seems to backtrack a little by accepting that the growth of the heart takes time. But still she falls back to a specific moment, or at least tries to by pushing the science angle that it's the start of the heart. What she's really defending here is the arbitrary definition of life as the moment of conception, and she needs science on her side to prop that up. However, the argument is not scientific, it's philosophical and religious, and it is prone to change over time. Stephanie is an example of this, and by regurgitating lies that start "science says," she is propagating a myth and ignoring the history of her own religion. It would be funny if it wasn't so dishonest. Link 9 in the show notes goes to a 1967 PDF examining different positions on when life starts. We intentionally picked an old document here so that listeners and readers can see that the position of when life starts is argued about in philosophy and religion with much disagreement, and that science really doesn't help this question at all, because there is no objective measure available here. The start of life definition is not one science answers, and by constantly repeating that it does, Stephanie reveals her own dishonesty and biases.
Justifying abortion on the grounds that a woman has a right to it is actually being manipulative, because it's misleading people as to biology, as to what pregnancy is. A woman who gets a negative pregnancy test never goes to an abortion clinic because she knows with a negative test it's just her body. If it's the positive test that's telling her, oh my gosh, I want to go to an abortion clinic, that's also telling her it's no longer just your body, that there is another body there. So I think when we speak of things that Bromley referenced, such as health care, and speaking about abortion in terms of women having access to health care, abortion is the exact opposite of health care. Health is a state of how the body ought to be. And pregnancy is a sign that the body is working correctly. Therefore, abortion is the opposite of health because it's directly and intentionally ending a state that has naturally and rightly occurred as a sign of a body functioning correctly and in a healthy manner. And care is about the opposite of harm. It's about preserving and protecting. And so maintaining a pregnancy is care. It's preserving and protecting the life and the relationship of the mother and child, whereas abortion is the opposite of care, because it's dismembering and decapitating the very body of one's own child.
Here we have Stephanie responding to a challenge about abortion being a healthcare activity, and that suggesting otherwise is manipulative. Stephanie responds by attacking back and reasserting that abortion is the taking of a life, and that suggesting that a woman has a right to it is in fact manipulative. Once again, she utterly fails to acknowledge any nuance in a situation where a woman sees abortion as a realistic option. The pregnant woman only matters if she agrees to bear the child to term. To consider any other option is to be evil and manipulative. This is religious control at its worst. The line that pregnancy is the body behaving naturally and correctly is a strange one, because any time we take any form of medical intervention, we are preventing the body from behaving naturally and correctly. Does Stephanie really want to take this line to its full conclusion and avoid potentially life-saving medical procedures because they prevent the body from behaving naturally and correctly? Of course she doesn't. She wants it to apply to her position on abortion and nothing else. This is why her position is the manipulative one.
Our human rights, particularly the most foundational of all, which is the right to life, is the right to life grounded in what you are, or how old you are, or how developed you are, or how strong you are. Because viability is about your age. It's about your development. It's about your maturity and therefore your strength. But human rights aren't grounded in those things. Human rights are grounded in the question, are you a member of the human family? Are you of the species Homo sapiens? And because the pregnant woman is human, because her partner is human, the only thing their offspring can be from the moment of fertilization onwards is of their same species, is also a human being. Yes, that preborn child is more dependent than the adults are. The preborn child is less developed than the adults are, but the preborn child is human and therefore ought to have the same rights as you or me. This idea of viability, we also need to realize, is dependent on technology as well as where in the world you are. So we have the technology to keep a baby alive in an incubator at 24, even down to 21 weeks after fertilization.
Here Stephanie asks a very important question of what constitutes human rights, and we get the first acknowledgement here that there is actually some nuance. That rights are not scientific but philosophical. That there is an emotional investment in this conversation. But she's addressing things that no one has said. No one says the developing cells and fetus are not human. The real issue here is one of priority. Who is more important, the woman who is pregnant or the developing being she is pregnant with? As soon as you demote the value of the pregnant woman, you are entering the murky world of misogyny and manipulation, and that's where fundamentalist religion lives. We at Still Unbelievable left that world for a reason, and everything that comes out of Stephanie's mouth reaffirms why leaving was a good thing.
What responsibility do civil societies expect of mothers to their offspring? And clearly there's a widespread consensus that mothers and fathers have a responsibility to care for and nurture their offspring, not end their offspring's lives.
The question of what civil societies expect is a valuable one. But here again, Stephanie is ignoring nuance and the possibility that the pregnant woman might also be vulnerable. She demands responsibility from that woman, so long as she bears the child to term. What about the impact on the woman's other responsibilities? What about the woman's ability to cope? These don't matter, and Stephanie doesn't comment on them, or even acknowledge them. Her focus is solely on what the woman is carrying and completely disregards the situation that the pregnant woman is in. A civil society should be holistic, not blinkered.
An individual with a separate set of DNA has come into existence, which science says is fertilization.
No. Science does not say this. There is no need for us to repeat what's already been said.
Beings that reproduce sexually begin their lives at fertilization. No one debates that when we're talking about dogs or cats which reproduce sexually. We know their offspring come into existence at sperm-egg fusion.
Does it feel like you're listening to a broken record yet? Mentioning cats and dogs doesn't progress the conversation. Reasserting an inaccurate and incorrect mantra doesn't progress the conversation. Link 16 in the show notes explains why invoking science doesn't help this conversation. Stephanie does herself and her argument no favours by repeatedly banging this drum. Sadly, most of her supporters will probably fail to fact-check her, so it's left to people like us to do it instead.
Even the United Nations says that, in its Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it says everyone has the right to life. And then everyone is defined in the preamble of that document as all members of the human family. And then in Article 6, they talk about personhood and say everyone has a right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law.
The UN Declaration of Human Rights says everyone has the right to life. That's true, it does. In Article 3, it states, everyone has the right to life, liberty and the security of person. If you read the whole of the declaration, there's a link in the show notes, you'll see that the context is the born. Here Stephanie is twisting context to force her point.
There are certainly people that claim the name of Christ who would embrace abortion, but I would say that if you look at what it means to be a Christian and to be a follower of Christ, it's impossible to be that and hold those views and therefore embrace abortion, because abortion is the exact opposite.
Here we get the full frontal of the ugly face of Stephanie's brand of Christianity. If you don't agree with her, you're not a real Christian. We expect this sort of nonsense from evangelicals because it happens all the time, but it seems Catholics are not immune to it either. It took almost an hour before this particular poison dart was thrown. Did you see it coming? We didn't. One would hope that two Christians discussing a sensitive subject would be able to hold a conversation devoid of this sort of thing. Seems we were wrong. Surely this must count as a loss under Godwin's law.
Humans are so valuable to God that he was willing to suffer and be crucified, die, and rise from the dead so that instead of having eternal separation from God, we could be reunited with him. So that's how valuable humans are to God, so valuable that he's willing to die for us. And therefore, if we're to be a follower of Christ, a follower of God, then we have to value human life the way he does. And so therefore, because science tells us we have human life from the moment of fertilization onwards.
Humans are so valuable to God that he caused David and Bathsheba's baby to fall ill and die. Humans are so valuable to God that he prescribes death for almost any form of infraction against his ridiculously unachievable standards. Humans are so valuable to God that under some interpretations of his vague book of laws, the punishment for not expressing total and utter devotion is eternal torture.
I would say we look to science to tell us when we have a human life, and we look to the scriptures to tell us how we ought to treat that human life. So because we know we have a human life at the moment of fertilization,
around 50% of fertilized embryos self-abort, most of these before 7 weeks. In this next bit, Justin asks Stephanie about the statistics that abortions reduce in more liberal countries which have legal abortion provision.
There is evidence that, in fact, it's the number of abortions have actually gone down under more quote-unquote progressive governments.
I would say that if you look at, for example, in places where abortion was illegal and then made legal, you always see an increase in numbers. I mean, there have been over 50 million abortions in America since it became legal. There weren't that many before when it was illegal. So where it is legalized, you generally see it increase.
This statement by Stephanie is flat out untrue. Abortion rates go down when it is made accessible to all, especially when it goes hand in hand with improved access to good sex education and safe sex products. The statement made about abortions in America post-legalization completely ignores the hundreds of thousands of illegal abortions that happened annually and the associated risks to the mothers. Legal abortion means safe abortion, and that saves the lives of the women who would have died during a self-administered, unsafe abortion. And the majority of those women would have been from low-income households, which typically means they would have been black. Stephanie's inability to acknowledge this should ring loud and very concerning alarm bells. See show notes for links to back this up. An additional problem in Stephanie's argument here is that she includes contraception in her definition of abortion. See link 11 in the show notes. Having already described abortion as dismemberment of a baby, Stephanie now includes a pill designed to prevent an egg implanting in the definition of abortion and adds that to her abortion count. Not only is she forced birth, she is also now anti-contraceptive. Can you imagine the devastating impact removing both options would have on the poor? Yet this is the world she wants and campaigns for.
Canada is known for being more of a socialist society, much like the UK, more welfare, more government involvement, government support. We have the same abortion rate in Canada as there is in the United States. Abortions are fully funded by the Canadian government in a way they aren't in the United States.
Here is another blatant untruth by Stephanie. The US, Canada and UK have different abortion rates. It was difficult to find complete figures, especially historical trends. But what we were able to find was as follows. The abortion rate, measured as the number of abortions per 1,000 women aged 15 to 44, is Canada 15.2, USA 20.8, that's a full 25% higher, UK 17, so in the middle but closer to Canada. Links in the show notes support this.
As someone who looks to the science, and believes in human rights, that Roe v. Wade ought to be overturned.
As we now know, Stephanie isn't looking to the science. She is taking her cues from her religion and then telling everyone that science supports her when it doesn't. Every claim that she's made about science has failed a fact check.
While I believe abortion ought to be illegal, I have kind of made my whole career built around the premise that abortion ought to be unthinkable.
Making abortion unthinkable is potentially a good ideal. You make abortion unthinkable by having a world where no woman ever is faced with a pregnancy which she can't handle or doesn't want. That means a world with no rape and no coercion, and contraceptives that are always and absolutely reliable when needed. But since Stephanie has not said she wants that world, and since Stephanie has an anti-contraceptive position, this world of unthinkable abortions won't happen on her watch. This is the tragedy here. She wants a world where it's impossible to make abortion unthinkable, and so is forced into controlling women and to stigmatise the very issues that her ideals cause. This is the ugly face of her Christianity.
If we can identify that moment, then our equality begins when we begin. And Bromley hasn't refuted the science of life beginning at fertilization.
By that moment, Stephanie is referring to the point where she says life begins. I can't speculate on why Bromley didn't challenge Stephanie's constant misrepresentation of what science actually says. But I will say this. There is nothing to refute here, because it is simply wrong. There is no alternative argument against inaccurate claims masquerading as truth. The only antidote is to expose the lies for what they are. So I will repeat what's already been said. Science does not say that life begins at a moment, and certainly not at conception. See link 16.
What is the most ethical response to those difficult circumstances? So whether someone is poor, they have perhaps no family support, they're trying to, just provide for their family, they're pursuing their career or their education, or perhaps they've conceived as a result of sexual assault, which was the case of a friend of mine, Liana Rebelito. In each of these circumstances, pro-life and pro-abortion can agree those are difficult, challenging, horrible circumstances to be in.
Firstly, we should clear up a blatant misrepresentation. It's not pro-abortion. Like with the real Christian comment earlier, Stephanie has let her guard down in her closing comments and once more revealed Christianity's ugly face. Out comes the poisoned polemic dagger. If you support the woman's choice to have an abortion, then Stephanie wants other people to hate you. She doesn't care if she makes life harder for you, because you must fall in line with her view or else, which goes completely against her earlier comment about which is the ethical choice. Stephanie would force you, against your will, to have that unwanted baby. You will suffer that additional trauma of enduring an unwanted pregnancy to term. If necessary, you can live in a convent and undergo daily proselytizing and live by rules dictated onto you, because you will endure that pregnancy. And this is the loving way to do it. You are not allowed to consider abortion. Stephanie wants people who admit to having an abortion to suffer a stigma that is many times worse than having a baby out of wedlock used to carry 50 years ago. How this might affect you and your loved ones is not important. You and they do not matter. This, according to Stephanie, is the ethical position. Yikes. You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.